Welcome to Mayhem CEDH, where questionable decks meet questionable pilots. Okay, first of all, we did have a game before this with Pilch on Oswald instead of Evan. Unfortunately, an Uba Mask stayed on the field for way too long, and honestly, Uba Mask is just a pain to edit. Pilch plays worst card ever, asked to leave the pod. So instead, we're going with this game for this week. First, we have Evan on Raggadragga, a Gruul combo deck that seeks to land an early mana dork into Raggadragga and win with one of many combos. Jack on Shorikai, You Are My Darling, a polymorph deck that controls the board, filters through the deck with Shorikai, and wins with a Hullbreaker line. Nick on Kamahl, Kodama, Big Green, an aggro deck that seeks to beat face and use its commanders to beat face even harder. And finally, Cody on the I Love Rocco Club, a Naya deck that utilizes a creature tutor in the command zone to either slow down the board or quickly win with layered protected combos. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let us begin. And for those of you in the Ames area, stick around to find out how you can get 10% off your next Mayhem Ames purchase. Evan draws and plays a Chrome Mox, imprinting Eternal Witness, a Mana Crypt, a Cavern of Souls naming Human as it enters, and casts a turn 1 Raggadragga, Gorgut's boss. In response, Jack casts Mindbreak Trap, exiling Raggadragga. The table cheers, Evan sighs, and passes. Jack draws and plays a Polluted Delta, cracking it, paying a life, and fetching up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a Moonsnare Prototype, a Mox Opal, a Voltaic Key, and passes. Nick draws, plays a Nykthos, Shrine to Nyx for turn, plays a Mox Diamond, discarding a land as it enters, and a turn 1 Collector Oof. Jack, feeling karma, sighs, and Nick passes. Cody draws, plays a Misty Rainforest, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, and passes. Jack draws, plays a Mystic Sanctuary tapped, and also passes. Nick draws, plays a Gaia's Cradle, and moves to combat, attacking Evan with the Oof. Evan takes the hit, and Nick passes. Cody draws, plays a Forest, and passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, and passes. Jack draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He casts his commander, Shorikai, Genesis Engine, and passes. Nick draws and moves to combat, attacking Evan with the Oof. Evan takes the hit, and at the end of turn, Cody cracks his Misty Rainforest, paying a life and fetching up a Savannah onto the battlefield. He flashes in an Archivist of Ogma, and the turn moves to Cody. Cody draws, puts a Temple Garden into play tapped, and moves to combat, attacking Jack with Archivist. Jack takes the hit, and Cody passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Jack loses Evan's Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, and passes. Jack draws and plays a Cephalid Coliseum. He casts Supreme Verdict, destroying all creatures, and finally freed up, activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. At the end of turn, Evan casts Veil of Summer, drawing a card. The turn moves to Nick. Nick draws, plays a Forest, and casts Fierce Empath, fetching up a Kogla, the Titan Ape, into his hand. He plays a Mana Vault and passes. Cody draws, plays a Birds of Paradise, and exiles Simian Spirit Guide and pays 2 life to cast Birthing Pod. In response, Jack untaps Shorikai with Voltaic Key and activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. Birthing Pod resolves, and Cody passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, plays a Destiny Spinner, a Uraga Tree Speaker, and passes. Jack draws, plays a Scalding Tarn, and cracks it, paying a life, fetching up an island onto the battlefield. He casts Merchant Scroll, fetching up a Whir of Invention into his hand, plays a Manifold Key, and casts Whir of Invention, where X equals 4, fetching up an Unwinding Clock onto the battlefield. Jack passes. Jack untaps with Nick, who draws and plays Kogla, the Titan Ape. It enters and fights Destiny Spinner. He follows it up with a Nature's Claim, destroying Birthing Pod and gaining Cody 4 life. At the end of turn, Jack activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. The turn moves to Cody. Jack untaps with Cody, who draws, plays an Esper Sentinel, and casts Skyclave Apparition. In response, Jack activates Shorikai, drawing 2, discarding 1, and creating a 1/1 pilot token. Skyclave enters and targets Unwinding Clock. In response, Jack casts Chain of Vapor, not paying for Cody's Sentinel, bouncing Unwinding Clock back to his hand. Cody passes. At the beginning of his upkeep, Evan loses his Mana Crypt trigger. He draws, levels up Uraga Tree Speaker, and casts Survival of the Fittest, not paying for Cody's Sentinel. It resolves and Evan activates Survival, discarding Birds of Paradise, fetching up a Heronblade Elite into his hand, and passing. Jack draws and casts Polymorph, targeting a pilot, paying for Cody's Sentinel. It resolves and Jack flips into a Hullbreaker Horror, putting it onto the battlefield. He casts Transmute Artifact, bouncing Mox Opal to his hand with Hullbreaker. It resolves and Jack sacrifices Manifold Key, fetching up a Soul Ring onto the battlefield. With no responses, Jack presents a loop of floating mana with Soul Ring and Mox Opal, bouncing and recasting them through Hullbreaker Horror to generate infinite mana. He then presents the same loop, but with Shorikai, activating and drawing his entire deck. With Jace, Wielder of Mysteries in his deck, the table sees the writing on the wall, and Jack wins the game. For those of you in the Ames area who stuck around, come to Mayhem Comics in Ames this week and ask for the YouTube discount. You'll be asked the question, who won? Answer correctly and get 10% off your purchase. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to catch future videos, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.